Hey guys, I want to talk about something that I've really just discovered in the past few weeks that has made a really big difference for me in terms of what happens when I go into a mode of internal contradiction and I'm thinking two things at the same time. Now, this is really quite common for me. I think this varies a lot for all people because it's my view that we're all very much fragmented and we all have different shards of ourselves. And this is primarily created through all the traumas that we're exposed to through many generations and lifetimes on this planet. It sort of breaks us apart, and there are versions of us that we disown or release our connection to in a way because we don't want to be identified with it, because it basically makes life harder to live in a 3D sense. So we get stuck kind of identifying with one aspect and then trying to forget about or bury other aspects of ourselves. And I think for other people, as opposed to myself, it might tend to be a little bit more in the background. Like it might be something you've only noticed during emotional flare-ups. It's one of those things where, like, if you've been doing more quote unquote work on yourself, I don't always love that term to refer to it. It's like, makes it sound like such a drag. And I'm always looking for ways to make it sound more exciting, because after all, it is about liberation, right? And it's about getting a better grasp of who you are and being able to just relax more and be yourself. So to always make it about work is kind of like, it's reality though, because oftentimes it is like work. And I think for a lot of people who have done a bit less work than I have, or are not as focused on that internally, they're used to kind of identifying as one, and if you want to look at it this way, their internal suppression is better than mine, so they're better at suppressing, or this might compare to you as well. And what that means is essentially other people are as fragmented as we are. Those who are doing less work are as fragmented as those who are doing more work. But the issue is they're so focused on having the identification with a primary version of the self that they really just don't see it. Whereas as you come into a greater phase of doing work on yourself and trying to understand yourself, journaling and watching videos like this and meditating and just kind of being a weirdo, as much as you start doing that, you get actually more aware of the internal contradictions sometimes. I'm just saying it can work that way, where you can feel even more at odds with yourself as a result of having done this. But that's just dredging it up, right? Because we dredge it up from the bottom of the river in order to be able to see it. And then once you see it, you can take the really decisive steps about what to do with it, how to let go of certain things and reintegrate other things. And it's kind of like the gigantic baking of the cake, or building the structure, or putting the, I don't know, however you want to look at that, whatever metaphor you want to use. So I want to go into this a little bit today, and I want to talk about a metaphor that I found for this that I think is helpful. And this does get a little bit out there because it stretches the limits of what human language normally allows us to do, and human thinking and psychology, and even in some cases what spirituality likes to have us do. But I've not found a technique or a approach that's as useful as this in some time. So I'm just saying I think it's something that really is worth an open mind. So here's what we're talking about. I briefly just introduced this idea of different versions of ourself, right? Example, so I think of myself as someone who's extremely hardworking, but then there's aspects of myself that are lazy. Then there's aspects of myself that don't even care if I'm lazy or hardworking, that just want to live in the moment and have fun and kind of do what I feel like at that one moment. And then there's versions of myself that are obsessive with planning. And there's versions of myself that are obsessed with relationships, regardless of this whole dynamic of how hard I'm working, and instead it becomes all about, can I please those in my life in whom I'm in relationship with? And so it goes on and on. This is just an example, but different versions of yourself that exist that way. So again, if you're like a workaholic type of person, you're always working, you could have another part of yourself that is lazy and doesn't really want to work. and just kind of burns out. And this part can surface from time to time. So imagining you have these different parts of yourself, right? And if we allow ourselves to see this as a full manifestation, it would look actually like different versions of you, right? So let's say there's a table where you're all seated, you and the different versions of you, you're all sitting around the table. Well, here's our first problem. What does it mean when I just said you and different versions of you? Because who are you? And if we say, well, I'm the one who works hard because most of the time I work hard, and sometimes I'm lazy, and sometimes I just want to have fun, and sometimes I focus more on the relationships, and sometimes I focus more on the spiritual work, and so I become kind of a spiritual workaholic, and I start going on backpacking trips, and it becomes escapist, maybe in an unhealthy way, whatever it might be. These are all other seats at the table, but I'm primarily the one who works really hard and wants to succeed in the world. But that's just an evaluation you're making about the situation, and it actually only comes down to like the percentage of time you spend in that role and your choice to identify with that primarily, right? Because if you are like 80-90% of the time you're this very success and work-oriented person, does that 10 to 20% just become not very significant because it's in the minority? Like, why is that the case? And just because you're this way now, what if 10 years ago when you were a kid or when you were younger, you didn't work as hard, you didn't care as much about success? Then your percentages change. Maybe you were 50-50. Half the time you worked hard, half the time you didn't give a shit. So as we evolve over time, you can also see. So the decision to say that a certain version of me is the real one and a certain other version is not the real one is just based on life convenience, and it's based on social convention. But it's not authentic. And this can be very confusing and hard to get your head around. But, and with this whole teaching I'm going through today, as with other things, it's very useful, in my opinion, to simply establish truth. And what you want to do is, writing it is extremely helpful. So journaling it down and try to get to the point where you can see, wait, this thing I'm writing down, this is true. And it doesn't actually matter if it's fully seeping in 100%. The point is to establish for yourself that in this moment, you can't disprove this. It's true. And so the truth I'm referring to here would be, there's no one version of me that is the only real one. There's other versions of me that I have to say could be just as authentic and just as important to me. So therefore, there isn't just one side of me that matters and the others don't. All of these parts of me, these versions of me, we all matter. And that would be the truth I'm talking about. And so if you write that down, reflect on it, think, how do you disprove that? And if it doesn't fully sit with you, that's okay. But just let it become part of your kind of, put it in the almost like the clothes dryer, put it in the dryer on like spin cycle, just to keep percolating there. And, especially when you're going to bed at night, and especially when you're getting up in the morning, just like think about it a little bit, let it, reflect on it and say, yeah, that is true, isn't it? And before you know it, you will be integrating that truth. And what that means is you're no longer going to have a knee-jerk reaction of saying, oh, I'm the workaholic, I'm the one that cares about being successful. To some of you, that might be scary, because if you've like made your whole identity on what you are as being a very successful workaholic person who's really into climbing the social ladder and getting promotions at work and resume building and being seen as an extreme overachiever, if that's what your identity needs to be and you've decided that, it's not going to be comfortable to be open to the possibility that might not be very authentic of you. And so it might hurt, but I've found actually it's much more of a release than it is painful, because the place that this really comes to shine is when you feel an internal contradiction come up. And that's when there's a real opportunity to experience pain and then to be able to find a way to release it. I'm getting to all that, but for now we're talking about how important and valuable it is to recognize true things and let them seep in. And this true thing is that you don't know which is the authentic, real you at the expense of others. And in fact, the concept becomes very confusing. If you're someone who's a really hard worker and loves to do well at work and loves to get positive reports from your boss, but you remember a phase you went through in your career, maybe a couple years out of college, when you kind of wanted to quit your job. Maybe you remember a phase that happened just very recently where it wasn't characteristic of you, and it might have only lasted a few days. Maybe for a few days you called in sick, but you weren't really sick. You just couldn't handle it anymore. Or maybe you remember something really far back, like back to your childhood, right? And maybe there were some years when you were a kid where you just did not care about grades, you didn't care what the teacher said. Maybe you were a teenager and you like got high and you were getting drunk and you'd goof off with your friends. Maybe it's the polar opposite, where you worked so hard when you were growing up at school that you got sick for 3 months and couldn't go to school for a few months. I mean, there's so many possibilities. In each of these cases, these would be other versions of you that you've decided in the present moment don't qualify to be fully you. They only qualify to be like little minor tiny versions, little tiny supporting characters in the play that is your life. Now, that's pretty profound. Chew on that, because you're talking about if your life is a play of characters and different aspects of yourself, that there's one, essentially just one, who gets to be in the leading role. And then there's a bunch of others who can only be supporting characters, right? So you're already making such huge value judgments about who you are. And chances are what happens is every time there's a bit of a conflict, it sends you into a tailspin. Like, let's say you've been working, we're just going to stick with this example. You've been working, and by the way, this doesn't really describe my life in case you're wondering, but that's why it's a good example, because it allows me to step into this potentiality. So let's say you're a very work and success-oriented person, but lately people at work have been asking you to go out and get drinks after. And you don't want to be seen as someone in the office who goes out with this particular group and gets drinks after work 3 times a week, because they tend to go to a sports bar, they tend to drink a little too much, they tend to shoot some pool, and this group of several people at the office, they don't have the best reputation. Most of them are not really climbing the corporate ladder at this point. They have been in the same job for 5, 10, 15 years, a lot of them. They don't really care. But you notice that you actually want to talk to them. Sometimes you have a good time chatting with them by the proverbial water cooler, or at meetings, at work meetings, sometimes you chit chat with them for a few minutes afterwards, and you always like talking to them. Maybe you've gone on a trip with one of them or with their family or something, and you had a good time, but you really hesitate to kind of ingratiate yourself too much with this group of people, because you don't want that reputation to follow you around. You don't want to do anything to jeopardize the successful you. So at this conflict, it's like, oh my God, who am I? And normally what people do is they stuff it away, and they essentially find reasons why that conflict isn't even happening. Like, they won't even go to the place of admitting that there is a conflict. They would basically say, oh, that's really nice, this group of people is inviting me out to get drinks tonight. I got drinks with them 4 weeks ago, so I think I'm good for a while. I'm just going to smile and say, oh, no, I can't make it tonight, and I'm going to go and do something else, right? And so you've told yourself, there's no conflict. I don't actually want to do that. I don't really want to go hang out with them tonight. I can't, because I have other things to do, and you'll make up an excuse. Or, you'll just tell yourself that maybe you don't have that much fun around them, and you'll find all these things to nitpick about these people, why they're not actually people you want to be friends with. But the reality is, you might want to be friends with them. You might want to get to know them better, or you might want to simply acknowledge the fact that you're not sure. And just acknowledging the fact that you're not sure could be very helpful in defining who you are, because it would allow you to say, yeah, there are parts of me that want to know what it would be like to not give a shit as much in this moment. There are parts of me that are curious how that would go. And if this happens to you, guaranteed in your early life and in your childhood, this conflict already happened. Because this question of like work versus leisure, or identifying as successful in the eyes of adults in our lives versus identifying as a slacker in the eyes of the adults and teachers and parents, etc. I mean, that would be a conflict you could experience from the time you're essentially a toddler, to be perfectly honest. So, if you struggle with this or another kind of issue, it's going to have its roots when you were a lot younger, and you might have made the same decision way back then about who you needed to be and who you needed to identify as. Or you might have made a different decision back then and then come to regret it, or thought you were regretting it and changed your mind when you got older and said, no, I can't be all about having fun. I have to be about having leisure. I can't be about too much fun and leisure. I have to be about only working my ass off all the time. So there will be roots to this, which is sort of the corollary of why then you go and do your inner child's work as well, and you just try to sit with versions of yourself that have been dissociated from or disowned because you haven't experienced them consciously for 20, 30 years. Maybe they're so far back, 40 years, 50 years, maybe they're so far back that you just are really out of touch with them. But this is how we get there. We see the evidence of this in our daily lives that we're living right now. We see the parts that we've shunned from ourselves. So where this goes, now that I've really painted this picture, is I started to say this, you have the table, and you're sitting all around the table with you and these different characters, like the characters in your play, the different versions of you. So what essentially you're looking at is, in these versions of you, in these parts of you, we have several, and I already mentioned them, and workaholic, the one that doesn't care, the one that just wants to do, spiritual bypassing, or just wants to get obsessed with spirituality, the one that wants to bury maybe substances. Once in a while you get into substances and you drink yourself to sleep at night. I don't know. Whatever it is, these different versions of you that fall into your pantheon of your own internal parts, right? And you're all seated at the table. So what happens as we have the one that we're primarily identifying with is that's the one that wears the crown. So I want you to think about it in terms of an actual, like a crown that a king wears. And one of the people at the table gets the crown. And that's all that this pronoun I is. When you say I think, I feel this way, I tend to be like this, I'm rarely like that, I like that, I don't like that, sometimes I'm this, but normally I'm not, whatever it is. That I, pronoun I, is only the one at the table that wears the crown. And I want you to try to disprove this right now. Okay, so how do we go disproving this? This is where it gets really fun, right? Because we get to see if I'm full of shit. But, first of all, can we say that, so first of all, let's say that we're going to acknowledge those other parts at the table, because sometimes I have different points of view. But we'll say, well, most of the time, I'm this one version, so therefore that deserves the crown, because the one that's a workaholic, normally, 90% I feel that way. So that one gets the crown. But what I'm saying is that's arbitrary, because you've just made the decision that you feel better when you're working hard and get that approval from other people. That's all that is. You made that decision about yourself, because sometimes you're not so sure about it, are you? So that's the first red flag, that it is just almost an arbitrary decision about who's wearing the crown, right? Because you have these other parts of you, and you could very well put more of your energy into identifying with them, but you choose not to. And so then you might say, from a spiritual point of view, well, yeah, but we're all one. We have one soul. And you say, okay, we have one soul. So that means we're one. So that means we should really be thinking of ourselves as a monolith or a unitary being, just one of us. So it's distracting and confusing to talk about different versions of parts of ourselves. But keep in mind that we also talk about the higher self as being something that's actually quite elusive. You have to go on deep meditations to connect to your higher self, don't you? You can't just connect to your higher self 24/7. You don't know what your higher self or your soul thinks or feels or wants all the time. You're not always in complete understanding of your past lives. You don't always know all the mysteries of the universe. You don't always know and feel all the many facets to life on Earth. You haven't integrated them all completely, which is what we're talking about. You haven't, you're not fully cognizant of what source or God means. You're not truly able to feel that all of the time. That's what all of this being on Earth is. We're approximating, we're doing the best we can, we're living, we're kind of like mucking it around like in the weeds with the coals, with the earthworms and the snails and slugs, and we're crawling around trying to figure everything out. And that's why we do spiritual work to try to remember, where the hell did I come from? That's this aspect of connecting back up the tree, of connecting to the soul, to the higher self. So what I'm saying is, to say, because I have one soul, that means I'm one being, and I only want to think of myself as a monolith, a singular. People use singularity in that way, but to be a grammar nerd, that's not technically correct. But a singular unit. To say that is totally pie in the sky, unrealistic, because we're not there. We do have different fragmented aspects. We have traumas. Okay, and so if you want to say, yeah, but ultimately I'm one soul, I'm one being, that's ultimately, that you're not in the ultimate position. Ultimately means in the ends. Lastly, at the ends of the line, at the end of the railroad tracks, I'm one. Are you at the end of the railroad tracks now? No, you're in the middle of them, trying to figure everything out. So, in that spirit, it really does make sense to look at yourself as different characters at this table. Some of them wear a crown and some of them don't. Now, I personally think that this is all a little bit facetious because, not to undo everything I just said, but there is a way in which you really can connect with the aspect of yourself that is just one, but the best times for doing that, and in the way in which we tend to be strongest at connecting with our inner oneness, is when we actually disconnect from set and fixed and rigid perspectives and play the observer with ourself and with life. Okay, that's the sort of the meditative observer's perspective. When we detach and play observer, we see ourself without the very fraught emotional connection to the identification with the self. And we see others without that very tense connection of they have to feel this way about me, I have to feel this way about them. Once you let that go and you just detach from all that stuff and let it be more objective in as far as you can, that's when you're more likely to feel as a one single being, because different perspectives no longer scare you. If you're really playing the observer well, it doesn't mean that you're completely detached from the multifaceted nature of reality and you simply see reality as one thing, full stop, end of story. Like you're not on a desert island of oneness and you can't even comprehend multiplicity. That's not what it would be. It wouldn't make sense in this reality, in this universe. What's happening is you're seeing the different facets of life and the different perspectives of reality, the different people that exist in this reality, and the different parts and perspectives within each individual person. That's how complex this all is, right? This is really complicated. You're seeing all that and you're okay with it. And that's what oneness is. So it's actually quite paradoxical. It's saying I can detach from the stickiness and the necessity of single perspectives in order to get to a place in which I'm not triggered anymore by those different perspectives and I can simply see and accept them all. So that's kind of a big ask, and it's quite hard for a lot of people to get there. When you do that, you're most likely to be able to experience a true and genuine, authentic oneness. So the way we live our lives in general, though, isn't that way, and that's sort of what I'm saying. So we come back to the table. Maybe now you're seeing what I mean a little bit more about these different parts. And it's a stumper. It's really tricky, because it seems so obvious to all of us that there's one of us. And yeah, sometimes I change my mind about certain things, but really stop and think about it. Where does that oneness reside? Especially when you have internal contradictions. And the more you tune into yourself on your healing journey, on your self-investigation, you will find lots of internal contradictions. And the more you find those, the more you're going to find yourself wondering, if you're being real with yourself, you're going to find yourself wondering, how do I know this is me and that other one isn't? So, what I'm suggesting is look at it as a table with these different characters and understand that one character has the crown. And then what you do is, as you get into one of these contradictions and you say, oh my God, I want to go out and I want to go to the bar with these people from work. I'm not even sure if I want to drink. I'm not even sure if I want to have more than one beer if I do go. Or maybe I want to drink a whole pitcher of beer by myself, whatever the case might be. But I'm going to go hang out with them and I want to see what that experience is like. Oh, but I also want to be successful at work and I don't want people to think bad things about me because they hang out with the bad people at work. when you allow yourself to experience that contradiction and say, oh my God, I actually don't know which one is more me. Just get to that place where you say, I don't know which one is me. It's scary to get there, and it takes courage. If you're there, awesome. You're doing an amazing job, seriously. And you're standing in the threshold between two versions of yourself, and you're confused, and you're saying, I don't know which is me. The biggest reason you are confused is actually that you think you have to be just one in this moment, when the reality is that the most authentic you can be is to understand that you're both. And you say, I'm both. There is me in both. A true, honest, genuine, and authentic accounting of me. So if there were like accounting books, if you could open up the ledger of me and see the parts of me and see them credits and debits and all that in the accounting book, you would see that there are entries for yourself authentically on both sides. There is a workaholic me that has a need for success and recognition by others and wants that positive feeling of being able to feel that I'm powerful and I can project my power and control out into the world through a high social position and status. There's that. We're not making any judgment if that's good or bad at all. We're just saying that's a part of me. And there's probably needs, wants, concerns, traumas, desires below that too, right? That's the rabbit hole. That's all me. Then there's the other side of the doorway, the one that wants to get to know different kinds of people, to relax with them, the one that wants to be able to not care, the one that wants to be able to detach from stress, the one that wants to be able to mix things up socially and be spontaneous, okay? And with its own needs and wants and fears and traumas and phobias and desires and everything. So you have both sides. You exist on both sides. You're on both sides of that fence, okay? They are both you. As soon as this is why I was mentioning earlier about the journaling and getting yourself to the point where you can acknowledge that there's different versions of you and just let that truth kind of percolate. And they're all you, they're all authentically you. Once you've been able to do that, when something like this comes up in the moment, you're leaving work and these people are saying, hey, do you want to come out with us to the bar? And all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, I don't know what I want to do. I don't know which side is authentically me. As soon as you allow yourself to say, oh, they're both authentically me, you know that you're now closer in alignment to seeing all different parts of you. You're closer to being able to acknowledge the different traumatized parts of you. And again, trauma being the results or the cause of all of this fragmentation. The one we experience it is so painful. See, the problem isn't being curious about or liking things that seem contradictory. That's not a problem whatsoever. The problem is that we have a problem with that. The problem is that we feel that identity needs to mean it's one kind of a thing, and there's this whole kind of matrix of needs and wants and consequences that goes along with that. When we get locked into that paradigm, that's when we're kind of screwed because we're setting ourselves up to not be happy. So this is what I'm saying. You just allow yourself to feel that you're both at the same time. Once you do that, there's no wrong decision. Because what would a wrong decision look like? I can be me over here and not me over there. I can be me over there and not me over here. But there's me on both sides. So I'm already acknowledging, it's actually being very realistic. Because what you're saying is, in matter of practical action, I can't be 100% of myself now. Now that sounds really, really scary. But if we want to get really real and acknowledge the fragmentation and the fact that we're split off from parts of ourselves, which is true, this is the trauma, this is what I'm talking about. If we want to get really real with that, it acknowledges understanding that at this particular moment in time, I'm not refined enough in my understanding of me, and I'm not integrated enough in my understanding of me to know actually which side of the fence of a given issue would be the kind of best option for me to be on. In other words, which side of the fence is going to lead to integration the fastest? Or if my entire paradigm is wrong and it isn't about one or the other, and there's a totally third option that involves a unification that I haven't even thought of. And it gets to be a spider web of complexity. But I do want to just close with touching on all of this because it's a problem when you don't give yourself the option to. Here, I want to put it this way: it's a problem when you look at concession as this horrible, horrible thing. So when you see that, oh my God, I have to be these are the gateways you pass through. First, you're going to not know who you are First, you're going to insist that you're only one thing. I'm the workaholic, I'm not the slacker. Then you're going to say, oh my God, what if I'm both? This is what I'm suggesting. What if I'm both at the same time? Then you're going to feel triggered because if I'm one, that means I'm denying part of myself. Oh my God, that's so bad. If I'm only one of these, then I'm going to be denying the part of myself that's the other half. So I'm doomed to only be 50% of myself at one time. Then you say, wait a sec, that's actually fine. I'm not doing anything wrong by doing that. At this present moment, with my current level of understanding of my traumas and integration of my traumas and healing my traumas, at my current level of where I am, it's gonna feel like I'm not there with myself at some times. But what you're doing is you're saying, no, I get you. I get all of you to the versions of yourself at the table. Different characters sitting around the table. I get all the versions of you. I know that at this present moment, I don't actually know how to fully express all of you at one moment. Why is that? Because I'm not fully enlightened. That's normal. That's part of the process. That's what we're doing here. But you say, even though I don't know how to fully embody all of your energy at one singular moment, I love you all these parts of me. I love you all. I care about you all. I accept you all seriously. And I'm here for you all. And if I can do anything better for you guys, you feel that you're not being heard, different versions of you. If you feel that you're not being heard, please let me know and communicate internally to me through an emotion, through a trigger, through a question, and I will do my very best to listen to you and to figure out how I can get closer to this integration where we're all on board at the same time, okay? So this is how you traverse all of this. This is how you take the steps forward, and you understand that ultimately it's not about one version of you wearing the crown at the table and no one else gets a crown. It's about taking the crown off. It's really painful. It's hard. You take the crown off someone's head, you put it in the middle of the table, and you say, I don't know who gets to wear the crown. And realistically, as a result of living life, different people are going to wear the crown, because at work, when your boss is leaning over your shoulder looking at what you're doing, you're going to be wearing the crown of the overachiever, at least somewhat. Maybe you'll have the crown halfway off your head, and you'll try to not completely get sucked into that identity anymore. But the crown might be on your head, and that's fine. And then later that evening, if you decide to go out with these friends and hang out with them at the bar, the crown might be on this other head of just hanging out and chilling and having fun. And that's fine too. But ultimately, you're going to less and less feel the need to have the crown on one head at one time. And you're going to be able to just take the crown off and say, oh my God, there's truth in all of these fragmented versions of me. And all it is it's just acknowledging reality. Again, can you prove that there isn't you in all these different sides? Can you prove that the only one that's you is the one that wants to be a workaholic, is the one that wants to be a selfless partner in relationships, is the one that wants to be a guru and a spiritual teacher? Can you prove that the only authentic you is the one that wants to be fiercely independent and only do things yourself? Or the one that is so cooperative that they're obsessed with anything that has co-op in the title, or unity in the title, or collective consciousness in the title, and they never want to be alone because they think all spiritual growth comes from being with other people on top of each other 24/7. I'm just giving different kind of extreme versions of identification. Can you prove that any of these is you? And that's it. And you're not any of the others. You're not any other version that you could think of. You're not any other version that's been trying to get your attention and trying to talk to you. Can you prove that that's you, just one? And if you can't, we're forced to the unavoidable conclusion that the only reason we identify as one is social convention and the pronoun I, which is a whole other interesting talk, right? To really get into the pronoun I. And when we understand that it's just convention that gets us to think that we have to be one, then we give ourselves permission to drop that. We give ourselves permission to see the plurality. It's all aspects of us. And it's very realistic to be able to do that. Okay. I hope the traffic noise wasn't terrible for any of you who got through to the end. Thanks for watching. But I'm not far from a busy road. It sounded like it was okay with the headphones, but anyway. Okay. Bye.